Hello, everyone. This is John Dupuy, and this is our ongoing Spiritual Technology Summit 2.0. And we have back with us Jeffrey Martin, which is like incredibly amazing, and our CTO Javi Otero from Spain, and we're in deepest dark Utah, southern Utah, and you are in Palo Alto, California, right, Jeffrey?
I am in Palo Alto, Sophia University.
And let me say just a little kind of a background statement is we interviewed you last year for this thing, and we didn't know how successful the whole summit was going to be, and it turned out to be this amazing thing, and it started connecting us. You know, we were like in our little world, I Awake world, and it started connecting us to all these people working with spiritual transformational technology or transformational technology. Then we met you, and you're kind of been like at the center of this thing. And then we met you at the conference, and that's when I really started liking you. I mean, the first it was just kind of a disembodied, you know, the guy's really smart and he's got a lot of gadgets. But when I saw you were running this conference, and I've had many friends that have put on conferences before, and usually they're just all stressed the hell out at the end. They're just, oh my God, they're just in a terrible way. And I noticed maybe you felt that way afterwards, I don't know, but during the whole thing, you were floating around and you had such equanimity and just, you were smiling and just enjoying the interactions and the struggle between people that wanted investors and investment money and all that tension and stress. And you were just like this beautiful Buddha present. So I went, oh, this guy's cool. And a fighter scorers. All right. Maybe he found it, you know, because he sure seems to be doing well with that. And then we were talking a little bit before we started, you know, turned on the recording here, is that about what are we talking about spiritual technology and transformational technology and just spiritual, because that's what the summit's about. So I gave a little definition and said, well, why don't you do that again so we can just get the ball rolling, and then we can plunge into that, and then we'll go wherever the river of inspiration and flow goes. So yeah, well, so spirituality, just as in a broad a way of approaching it, deals with ultimate questions. Okay, is God real? Is there life after death? How in the hell is there something as opposed to nothing? How did nothing go poof? Hydrogen gas, 11.7 billion later. We're having this conversation about transformational spiritual technologies. What is going on with that? And also it deals with the transformation of the individual human being and the technology part of it is because my understanding of the way I look at history of spirituality is that often it was only a few people every generation that would show up that would be these, you know, these spiritual beings or great teachers, and we'd all go hang out with them and hope to get some kind of transmission. And, you know, it was really messy and didn't work for a lot of us. So we just had to listen to these guys or gals, and sometimes they were really cool people and sometimes they weren't, and it was just kind of really messy. Now with the spiritual technology, and, you know, I've been doing this, doing the kind of brain entrainment stuff personally for about 11 years now. It's just like the diamond there, this kind of erupting flash of, you know, glory in the universe, is that many more of us now can actually engage in an ongoing, transformational, contemplative, revolutionary, evolutionary daily practice that actually gets us there, and not just as state experiences like, wow, you know, you do acid or something. And I'm always talking, I joke about, you know, I did shrooms in Oaxaca in 68, dude, it was like, you know, yeah, it was 1968, you know, what's going on now. So that this technology is actually making it available, and in ways that perhaps don't have some of the negative side effects that some of our original, you know, boomer technology, psychedelic drugs, you know, most of us didn't have a lot of wisdom when we were doing that stuff. We didn't have much guidance. So yeah, so now we can democratize waking up for millions and millions of more people in an integral or holistic way. So not just a little part of, but the whole human being shows up with wisdom and creativity and compassion and skillfulness in ways that we couldn't do in generations to come. And that's what the whole point of this thing is, I do believe. So.
I think that's awesome. I mean, as you know, that's basically what we've been working on research-wise for the last 11 years or so, as we make this video. So yeah, I'm totally down with all of that. One thing that I would say is I'm not sure that we can ever really make progress on the first part of the supposition, which is, why does anything exist? And one of the things that I think is fascinating to me is that, generally speaking, as people transition into so-called higher states of consciousness, or whatever we want to refer to them as. Our academic term for them is persistent non-symbolic experience, which basically covers, enlightenment, non-duality, persistent mystical experience, etc. But also a lot of atheists and agnostics that don't have any sort of religious or spiritual bent on this, for whom it's
not to mention the Buddhist, yeah, they don't do the God thing. So
right, sort of depends on the sect, I find.
That's true. There's some gods creeping in there, but yeah, generally it's pretty godless.
So yeah, I think it is an interesting time, in the sense that we really have seen in our data since about 1996, there seems to be an acceleration of people reaching these states in a persistent way, which is kind of amazing. The only thing that we were ever able to really correlate that to was a rise of the internet, or a certain tipping point sort of being reached in the internet from an internet standpoint, but who's to say if that's true? So the Finder's Course is really still an experiment. To me, right? To the public, I think it's a very well-established program at this point that's had an impact on a lot of people and whatnot. But for me, it's still one of our primary data collection efforts. And it's still something that allows me to refine and learn about and whatnot, all of this PNSE stuff and the changes that people go through with PNSE and whatnot. So basically the Finder's Course comes from about 8 years of research that preceded it. 7 or 8 years of research that preceded it with these types of people that are in persistent non-symbolic experience. And we did all kinds of stuff, everything from neuroscience to cognitive science to just standard psychological stuff, and really tried to get our arms around the population and figure out who they were. That's where we discovered that there were different types of it and stuff like that. And about 7, 8 years in, I think we really thought that there would be a possibility of transitioning people with technology. That brain stimulation technology was pretty sophisticated. Neurofeedback technology was pretty sophisticated. And I think the belief really was on our side that one of those technologies, or maybe those technologies in combination, would be able to actually get somebody to persistent non-symbolic experience. And so we were really kind of working on that. Unfortunately, the regions of interest that came back from like fMRI work and deep brain EEG work and stuff like that, they were too deep in the brain for modern technology, at least at that point. And so although we tried a whole bunch of different things, we just couldn't get cleanly to the level of depth inside the brain without affecting a lot of other places, going in and out. And so the technological side just simply didn't work. And that was a problem because up until that point, we'd only had what I call B data, right? Which is post data. So you have A data, which is before you do something to someone, and then you have B data, which is after you do something to someone. And the idea, of course, is to figure out what happens between A and B, right? And sort of extract a lot of richness on the path from A to B out of your data. But there was nobody that we found anywhere around the world. You're talking about over 1,000 research subjects, basically every culture that's out there. I mean, you name it. It was just a huge study, a huge global study. And there was nobody that we found that was reliable enough at inducing persistent non-symbolic experience that we could justify, the expense of AB neuroscience and things like that. I mean, if you do an fMRI, it's $2,500, $3,000 per scan by the time you're all in on analyzing it, and the scanner time and the techs and all that. So that's a lot of money, right? That's basically makes it somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 per student, per subject to get an AB. And then if you get the A and you don't have the thing that gets you to the B, you've basically just wasted tons of money. And so we really were trying to find something that would do that. And in the end, we didn't really find anything out there. So we wound up making our own. We went back to the original data, and there was one question that we'd asked that, frankly, we just ignored because we were so technology centric. My background before I was a scholar was technology and business and stuff like that. So my graduate degrees were like in management and computer technology and stuff like that. So I had this very technological orientation to me, really, aside from the later neuroscience stuff and the psychology stuff that came later. And it just wasn't happening. So that question that was on those intake forms basically just asked people, and it sounds so simple in hindsight, right? It's almost silly to have to admit this. But basically that question asked people, hey, what worked for you? Right? Now you would have thought that we would have gone back and look at that question, oh, I don't know, after 6 years or 5 years or 4 years, or maybe like the second we collected that question, right? But we were just so technology centric that we were like, whatever they say, that's just going to be not helpful. We're going to do this by zapping the brain or whatever else. And it was only when it was clear to us that we weren't going to be zapping the brain anytime soon and getting there that we're like, all right, well, let's see what they said. So we go back, and it turns out that there's only a relatively small number of things. There's a lot of complexity around that. Every time I say that, people are like, oh, what are they, right? But then we'd have to talk for like
there's
hours.
One thing.
Complexity involved in that small number of things. This is, the entire Spiritual Technologies 2.0 series would be us, episode after episode, flushing that out.
Yeah.
But we basically spent a year putting together a protocol, in part based on that answer, in part based on positive psychology, cognitive science, some of the neuroscience stuff, putting together basically everything that we had up to that point. And what we were left with at the end of that was an A-B design that worked quite reliably. It worked very, very well at an individual level. At an individual level, we basically batted 100%. And then in groups, which we do with like the Finder's course, it's about a 73% average. So 73% of people have an ongoing shift to persistence, and about another 26% have temporary glimpses, and then 1% we just do nothing for.
And for the sake of the uninitiated here, can you describe what you're talking about when you talk about this persistent non-symbolic awareness? What is exactly that? I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but maybe I don't. So
sure, that's another thing that we could spend the whole series on. So the best thing I think for people to do is go to nonsymbolic.org, and there's a publications page, and there's a summary paper at the top of that, plus a whole bunch of interviews and stuff like that, like this, that do dig into just that and the details of just that. The short answer is that it's really our bucket term, our academic bucket term for things like what religious and spiritual people call things like enlightenment and non-duality and persistent mystical experience and transcendental consciousness and God consciousness and stuff like that. Yeah, I have not given up on my, technologist roots. I think that, I really think that we're gotta lick this with technology, right? I mean, I think the Finder's course I kind of think of it as a miracle. If you think about how many, it's not a miracle in some sense, in that it stands on millennia of humanity hacking on this stuff, right? And so in one sense, it's like all of the collective wisdom of humanity on this put together in a certain time and place when it was probably the first time when it could really be done in that way, and whatever else. And so, but from the other side, it just seems phenomenal in terms of just the success rate. It's just, I've got to be, if I'm not the top, I got to be one of the top experts in PNSE in the academic world. And I would have completely said it was impossible to have that kind of success rate. I mean, if a program came along and had a 1 or 2% success rate, I would have been like, that's the most successful program in human history. So one of the things that's interesting about this, right, is that the Finder's course takes 4 months, and it begins at 1.5 hours of time a day. And it goes up from there to 2.5 hours or even longer towards the end of the course, right? And so the reality is that just not a lot of people are going to be able to use that. And there's lots of, it's just one of those things where, as amazing as it is, it's not going to affect billions of people in all likelihood. And I think the only way that we can affect billions of people is with, by engineering this into technology, by having it be something that sits on their cell phone or whatever else. And that was really the whole idea behind this notion of the transformative technology space and all of that. And so the transformative technology space actually started off as enlightenment engineering. It turns out that there are 2 people that coined that word about the same time. Jeff Lieberman at MIT and I were apparently using the word enlightenment engineering around the same time and getting roughly around the same traction for it. Right, so it turned out not a lot of people were interested in engineering enlightenment. And so the transformative technology term, my PhD is from CIS, and it was in a program called Transformative Studies, and so I just called it Transformative Technologies. That's where the whole space is named from, essentially. and it was only, so it became technology for well-being, and the idea was, well, maybe if we can pull in engineers and scientists and researchers and stuff that are interested in technology for well-being, we can find some of them are interested in engineering enlightenment. So we can pull them to the very core of the trans tech space around this notion of engineering PNSE type stuff. And that actually has worked out pretty well over time. So that's where the trans tech space comes from, but it's a lot broader than that. It really is technology for well-being. You know, the conference that you went to last year was sponsored by Google, for instance, and that happened because somebody from Google, we know a lot of people at Google, and we probably just could have got it sponsored anyway, but how it actually happened was that a lady went from, I think she worked for Google X, and she went and she did all of the exhibits the previous year, and she had a profound transformation, and she went back inside of Google X, and she made something that I can't talk about, but it had a profound impact on Google's culture. It solved kind of a really significant part of a core cultural problem inside of Google by shifting, you know, basically by shifting people's consciousness in certain ways. And so as a result of that, you know, she was like, tell me, you know, what can I do? You know, what can we do to help you out in the following year? And that's kind of the way there's been this magnified impact from the space. And so she wasn't going back to Google X to try to engineer PNSE, right? But what she did engineer in terms of the consciousness of people inside of at least some sections of Google was really significant and, you know, powerfully impactful. So the space, the transformative technology space, which also includes some other offshoots, and, you know, we started the consciousness hacking thing a long, long time ago, which it's grown pretty well. It's changed from what it was supposed to be. It was originally supposed to be people coming together to hack together Enlightenment engineering.
When you say a long time ago, this is like dog years or something, you know, it probably wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, however long ago it was now.
Yeah, okay.
5 or 6 years ago, maybe.
Okay, well, that's a long time in this field, yeah.
And so I was living in Florida at the time when Mikey Siegel, who's kind of, I guess you could say one of my proteges in some sense in the space, a good friend of mine, came and lived with me in Hong Kong and all of that. He was living out here, and he was just sort of kicking around. I actually wasn't sure about the name consciousness hacking. We're kicking around different names, you know, and I'm like, because I'm a computer hacker from back in the day, right?
Right. You
like,
say, you know, the Russians hacked the
that.
election. It's not a good thing. When I first heard of it, that's horrible. You're destroying consciousness. You know, I had the negative.
Me too, right? But then it wound up being like a great name that he went with. So I was, you know, takes a committee sometimes, not necessarily just one cook getting it wrong. And so anyway, he basically started those as like dinners and, you know, and Santa Cruz, where he was living at the time. He had this great cabin out in the Redwoods at the time that was really fun to stay at. And now, you know, they're in cities all over the world, and, you know, they're usually relatively small. Maybe 20 people get together here or there, or there's a couple of big ones, like San Francisco is usually about 100 people, I think. New York's usually about 100 people. And so, you know, there are all these community building efforts like that that are out there that are sort of part of this space. And then there are all kinds of VC stuff and the financial stuff that you ran into. I think we invited you, I'm pretty sure, before the last Trans Tech conference.
Yeah, terrific.
And so, you know, that was great. It brought together people who needed money and people who had money. People got licensing agreements in other countries from that. And I mean, the whole thing really helped to expand quite a bit. And so we do things like that. You know, we help business people find the engineers, and engineers find the business people, and both of them find the money and then help them find the markets. And so we've really tried to sort of just spin up this ecosystem around transformative technology. Our view is that a lot of people working on stuff can do a lot more than if we just work on it. And then within that, you know, personally, I'm most interested in the PNSE engineering stuff. And so folks like you who are heavily into PNSE engineering, you know, you get more of my time than that. As much as I love, you know, I've got a bunch of devices around here. Like this is a Spire, for instance. It's like a breath clip on your belt thing. Nima's into, you know, expanded states of consciousness and stuff, the guy who started that company. But this isn't necessarily being sold in the Apple store all over the place for, you know, to get people into PNSE, right? So I don't talk to Nima as much as I might talk to you, as an example, because you're like, you know, going for the heart of it. You know, if you would have heard of the enlightened engineering space years ago, you might have been a part of it. You would have been the third person. But so I think so there's a couple of different things in the transformative technology space. One is shaping it for the Googles of the world, and the Spires and whatever else. And then the other really is trying to maintain that original focus on what you call more spiritual technologies, and trying to find the people who are really into that and interested in that, and support those people and push that all ahead. And there's many fewer of those people, and that's a harder road to hoe than the other stuff. But because it's now part of this larger ecosystem, it's a lot easier to support it. It's getting a lot more support than it ever has.
Certainly, yeah. And of course, my vision from the very beginning, whether I'll achieve this, successful, is hundreds of millions of people need to be doing this. And we also, it's not just the technology, but just as, in your finder's course, you have to have teachers. This is why we're doing this, to guide people to understand why to use it, why we're doing, what is the overall vision here, and why it's important, and how to do it skillfully. It's not enough just to give, a 3-year-old kid a Ferrari and say, here, the keys. They don't know what's going on. So it takes support, it takes community, it takes people that have done the work themselves, and for a little further down the road that will work with people. So it's not just this dissociated thing. I have the technology, I'm good now. It's still calling us to be together and to work together. And the deepest values that have always really mattered still matter, and maybe even more now, because we have such potential to use technology in a bad way, or at the same time, maybe at the 12th hour, it's going to be the technology itself that we've developed that will begin to make the future a beautiful possible reality for humans
and
and everyone.
There's so many different technologies, I think, and they're useful, not just, one of the things that has become clear to me in the last year since we've talked, that I wasn't thinking like this a year ago, and I'm not entirely sure why, except that I'm not sure that I'd run the Explorers course yet, or maybe I just started to run the Explorers course. But running the Explorers course has really forced me to focus a lot more on the integration of PNSE versus getting to PNSE, right? And so for most of our research project, it's basically been, how do you get people, faster and more safely and more reliably to PNSE, and just as a function of running that other, what's to me a research program, what's to other people a class, right? Just as a function of running that other research program, the Explorers course, for the last year now, it's focused me more than I would have otherwise been on the integration side of it. And so one thing that's interesting about these technologies, and let me just add one thing to that. I just put out a survey yesterday to people who are on our Finders course list. And I was just looking this morning before the call with you at what the results were. And one of the questions that we asked was, are you more interested in, which of the following are you more interested in? A, transition to PNSE. B, integrating in PNSE. C, figuring out where you're at and what to do about it. And then we had a bunch of different meditation ones, like finding your meditation fit, getting around your barriers to meditation, stuff like that. The meditation ones got very, very few responses by comparison. Not surprising. People on our list are interested in PNSE, right? Mm-hmm. That's why you would find us. It's all that. But I was surprised. It was I was watching the statistics yesterday. It was neck and neck for a long time around integration versus getting there. And so there were an awful lot of people that we sent that email to who clearly feel like they're in PNSE, and the thing that they really need is integration help.
Yeah.
And then this morning, I think it was like 60-40 when I looked at it. There was 60 in favor of people wanting to get to PNSE, 40% of people or so, just roughly, it wasn't quite that high, but of the people who answered those two questions, it was like 60% of people one way, 40% of people another way. So the fascinating thing to me is that says that there's this need out there for spiritual technology to not just help you get there. Certainly the vast majority of the population needs it to get there.
Yeah.
But that there's also an increasingly, a growing number of people who really need it from an integration standpoint. And so I've started to use these technologies that way for myself, of course. One of the things that I was going to show you, I don't know if you can see it or not. This is a
beautiful
device called a Welby. And WELLBE, literally all one word. And it's just a, it's just a watch. It's not even a watch. It's basically, I'm going to take it off here and show it to you. So it's basically got just like a heart rate sensor on the back. And then every hour, it takes a snapshot of your heart rate variability from your wrist, which is no small feat. And basically, it gives you a readout of that on a smartphone app on your phone. And that smartphone app is one of the early apps. We were talking about this, I think, last time. It's one of the early apps that I said we'd start to see this year, where it integrates with your calendar, it integrates with your GPS. And so it basically can say, hey, when I took this reading, you were in a meeting with such and such, or you were at, this location. And what we're going to see over the course of the coming, couple of years is that our devices are going to get more meaningful like this. They're going to be able to tell us, you really shouldn't meet with your boss first thing in the morning. That's not good for you. Try to schedule that meeting with the boss for the afternoon.
You shouldn't drive from Palo Alto to San Francisco at 6:30 in the morning.
Right, under no circumstances. Exactly. It's only holding humanity back for LA and San Francisco rush hours or whatever, right? So there's really fascinating insights that I think are going to come from that. But from a PNSE, that's just for the general population. That's cool. That's trans tech, right? Blah, blah. But what's really, really neat for me from a PNSE standpoint is that I know that in persistent non-symbolic experience, you have a reduced awareness of your physical body. Now, everybody thinks it's the exact opposite from the inside out, right? So if you ask a PNSE person, hey, do you think you're more or less aware of your physical body than you were prior to PNSE? They're like, oh, no, I'm way more aware now than I ever was of it because I'm in the moment and my body, blah, 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 right? But when you actually test it in different ways, it turns out to not be the case. We haven't just done work on that. Other people have done work on that too. There's a great study by Richie Davidson with advanced Tibetan meditators versus college students at University of Wisconsin-Madison, stuff like that. So I know as someone who's in PNSE that even though it feels like I'm more in tune with my body, that's not actually true. And so a device like this that can tell me what my heart rate variability is hour to hour to hour, I'm finding incredibly helpful.
Nice.
To give me an objective tuning. I don't have to do anything. I just have to leave it on my wrist. It would be nice if the battery life was a little longer. But I just have to basically leave it on my wrist, and I can look back at my smartphone every hour or two, or if I'm thinking about it, every 10 hours, whenever I do, right? And I can say, oh boy, my body really showed a lot of stress at 2 o'clock. Wow, what was I doing at 2 o'clock? Because my experience was that I'm at peace. Right?
Yeah, and maybe the body becomes less of a prison and more of a vehicle, and there's more kind of subtle awareness of the energetic states. And when you go into these, these flow states or these really highly functional states, it just seems pretty effortless. I mean, whether you're playing music or writing or teaching or talking or sports or whatever it is, there's just this kind of magical quality that you move through, and everything is just easier to be in.
Yeah, and PNSE is just sort of like that most of the time, if not all the time, depending upon when your location is. And so as a result of that, you're not necessarily as tuned in to I think it's funny, right? I don't think it's funny. I think it's a little crazy and somewhat sad that people jump off of mountains and stuff to get into these temporary flows.
Big time, right? Yeah.
I mean, just, you don't have to risk your life and limb. You can just, take the finder's course or something. Then you can have it all the time, right? And then you don't have to jump off mountains for that 10 seconds or whatever when, you're in that sort of state. But so anyway, I was just thinking about this type of thing is really useful.
Yeah.
From so trans tech now, I'm thinking of it slightly differently than maybe I was a year ago. Where a year ago I was thinking, this is to help people get there. But now this stuff is also very beneficial to help people stay in it. So things like heart math, which I think I have a heart math thing here somewhere.
Yeah, we just interviewed Dr. Deborah Rossman a couple weeks ago. She was a delight. We had a great time.
Like these things, right?
Yeah, heart math is not.
So Debbie, where you just click this on your, and yeah, Debbie's fantastic. The whole heart math team, they're great, right? So you clip this on your ear, you stick this in the computer or into your phone or whatever else, and there are a lot of people that since I've been talking about this using these technologies post-PNSE, I've since discovered that a ton of people post-PNSE use heart math in order to figure out, they find a tremendous value in coherence. And in fact, I was with somebody the other day, just to pick one person. I like to often just pick one person because it's easier to maybe understand a conversation with one person. And I was talking to them about their use of heart math, and they basically, they're pretty much around location 3. And this person was basically saying that when they really, really max out like an 8 or so out of 10 in heart math system, that's when they're really in like, the highest states that they can experience, these really amazing sort of ongoing bliss states and stuff like that. And so that person is just a great example, but I've met many others who find that heart math is really, really beneficial in terms of learning to regulate the physiology, and not leave out the physiology component from a PNSE standpoint. Just as
no, and what's really nice about these transformational technologies is that they meet you where you're at. You may be there because you just want to get through grad school and you're stressed out, or you may be depressed, or you want to win the Gold Cup or the World Cup or whatever, and it meets you there. That's very kind of exoteric thing. And then of course it helps people actually do the stable waking up, the non-dual states or non-symbolic consciousness. And then afterwards, after this chop wood, carry water, it helps you to integrate it. And what it means is kind of awareness means now, and in 2017 is probably a lot different than in 1917 or 1817. It's a whole thing. And so there's just this evolution is it's really interesting. And so wherever you're at, if you just think your eyes are crossing, listening to all this, you have no idea what we're talking about, that's okay, because this stuff will meet you where you're at in a really transformational and supportive and healing and awakening help.
Yeah, I am not the world's greatest creator of Onramps. Back when I taught computer science, like you did not want to have me in an introductory computer science course. You wanted me as like your last class, right? I'm like tuned for the most advanced stuff. But there's so many awesome on-ramps to this. People talk to me all the time about the impact that the Headspace app had on getting them to meditate regularly and getting them to find space. Right. But getting them to just realize that they're not their thoughts. Somebody was telling me just over the weekend, actually, that I'd not listened to Headspace, so I don't know like what their stuff says or whatnot, but they were saying that they just heard the most useful analogy in their Headspace app where, we've all maybe heard the notion of your thoughts are just clouds passing in the sky. Imagine your thoughts are clouds passing in your sky. I guess in Headspace, there's something, instead of it being clouds passing in the sky, they made it traffic passing on the street, which is a lot more practical, probably to most people's, moment-to-moment experience.
Yeah, most of us, except on an airplane, we're not really passing through clouds unless we live in the mountains or something like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And so, even Headspace is a great on-ramp, right? Something like, you've probably had Muse on. So something like a Muse headset, right? Which is literally just, just.
It's very eloquent. It's eloquent. It's lovely.
That is a powerful on-ramp to people. It really helps them to get some space and some distance from their thoughts. Now, I'm not convinced that a Muse gets you to PNSE. I don't know, or Headspace gets you to PNSE or anything like that, right? But these are all really important starting points for people.
Absolutely.
Even something like Aspire, which has, breath tracking and breath coaching and stuff like that, right? The heart math thing, having breath coach. Heart math can take beginners and, pull them right from there. As an example, it can even be stuff that's simple. It's really simple like this, right? This is something you can buy on Amazon for like $10. And this is a thermistor. You just hold it, basically it takes your temperature. You just hold it between your fingers. And, and all this does is basically show you the readout, just basically shows you what your temperature is. Your temperature changes when you're, more relaxed. It doesn't get any cheaper than this. You don't need a $200 product or a $300 product or a $99 product. I mean, I don't know what this costs, but it's probably like $10 or something. It's got to be it's literally just like something that you would sit in your office to tell you what the temperature is with a wire stuck on it, right? That you hold between your fingers. I mean, I have, a few other things here that are sort of like that. Like here's a GSR version of this. Right now in the Finders course, we're doing something really special. And I really want to thank you for helping out with it. and we're basically recording people from the Muse headband, and this is a polar heart strap. So we're using a polar heart strap. And so we're getting heart rate and HRV data, brainwave data, and we're also getting this, which is GSR data. So this basically just plugs into your smartphone jack.
Nice.
And then here's the guts of it right here. So these are things that stick on your fingers. So you just basically take them off like this, and you stick them on your fingers like that. And they essentially record, you can think of it as just recording an electrical signal in relation to your skin, but it's a direct read off of your sympathetic nervous system. So the heart rate stuff is a mix of parasympathetic and sympathetic. And so you think of parasympathetic as putting on the brakes and sympathetic as pushing on the gas, right? So a tiger is running at you, your sympathetic system goes crazy. Stop digesting food because you might never need that digested food. All the energy goes.
Or you're going to be digested food very, very quickly.
All this adrenaline. So that's the sympathetic. And then the parasympathetic is slamming on the brakes and thinking, you know, this guy's going to eat again. We better digest some of this food and get out of here. So it's sort of the more relaxed version of it or whatever, right? And then there's a balance sort of between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic that can be very important in all of that. So the heart rate stuff shows you that balance. But the great thing about a technology like this, which is GSR, and you can buy GSR devices, again, super cheap. This is about a $100 one. But you can buy them a lot cheaper than that. That gives you an immediate read on training your sympathetic response. These things have been around for decades at this point, long before they were plugged into smartphones and stuff. In fact, here's an older one that doesn't require a smartphone, where you just basically put your fingers on it, you know, like that. And these can also do, you can buy a temperature version of this, you can buy a GSR version of this, totally low tech. So there's all these different things that are fantastically simple on-ramps for people into this transformative technology space, all kinds of price ranges. You know, if you don't have a lot of money, it doesn't matter, because there's something out there that you can afford, and they're all great. You don't have to think to yourself, oh, well, gosh, I can't afford the whatever $200 Muse or whatever they're charging for it now. I can't afford the $200 Muse, so I'm just never going to make progress. Well, just pick one of these things up for like $10 or.
Well, you know, and you look back at, you know, movies that were like the early 1990s, and, you know, you see they have these mobile phones that look like a shoebox, you know, and they're in really fancy cars and cool clothes. And this is like really high tech stuff. And, you know, all this thing could do was really scratchy, awful phone call. I mean, that's it. And now you look what we have, and it's like, oh my God, you know.
And possibly make you sterile.
Yeah, and possibly right, make you sterile, and so yeah, can you imagine in 10 years from now if this, you know, this thing keeps going? God knows where we're going to be with this stuff.
Yeah, you know, pretty soon I think we're not going to be doing any of this, right? We're not going to be like, you know, there's not going to be any of this stuff going on. We're not going to have stuff stuck to our fingers.
You know, it really looks kind of like jewelry. Right, an earring and kind of a cool headband.
No matter how
it's a good, it's a good look. No, it's a good look for you. That stuff will be relegated to retro jewelry. You know, at that point, it won't be the technology.
It will, you know, and it's all going to mostly come down to just your smartphone, right? And so even on the back of the smartphone right now, I mean, there's a you know, a thing that can read my heart rate variability and all of that, right? I think even like the smart watches on the other wrist is a Samsung smartwatch, right, which reads heart rate and stuff like that. I think even these things are going to go the way. And that's because right now when I'm looking in this camera, there are algorithms that can tell you what my HRV is.
That's right.
From just looking at the camera.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think about that, how many people are out there doing this all the time, right? Taking selfies, taking videos of themselves, whatever else, right? So there's this endless opportunity every day for people's phones to capture HRV. Not hard to do, right? There's also in here, you can, you know, you of course can connect to Wi-Fi signals and stuff with it. This can be a Wi-Fi hotspot, the whole bit. Well, there's recent work out of MIT where they're able to detect all kinds of biophysiological stuff off sort of a Doppler effect, meaning bouncing Wi-Fi signals off of you and looking at the differences when they reflect back, that type of thing, right? So those are just two sensor technologies that are already built into our phone that mean I don't have to clip something on my ear. I don't even have to stick my finger on the back of this thing, right? Even that can go away. And that's not even the mother load. The mother load is voice. And so if you look at like Beyond Verbal, who we had speak at the last TransTech conference, they were somebody that we tried so hard to get. We had no idea how much we were begging them to come to speak at the conference. And we're so grateful that they did, because we really feel like technologies like theirs are the future of all of this, right? Our computers are always laying around listening to us. The Amazon Echo stuff and all of that's laying around our house listening to us. Our smart TVs are listening to us. Our phones are always on us listening to us. And so if you think about that, there's this tremendous amount of voice data that's always out there. And a company like Beyond Verbal that has patents on frequency analysis, and there's all sorts of other ways to do it, and there's all sorts of other neat companies out there doing stuff like this. They can, I mean, I think I saw a patent from them that said they were able to detect Parkinson's like years ahead of when it showed up just off the voice. And I mean, they're doing crazy stuff like that with it. Stuff like your emotional state, right? The state of your health in various ways, developmental level, even your developmental level, your cognitive developmental level. There's so much stuff that can be picked up on just off of voice. That alone, I think, is going to make the sensors.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, when does this start to, you know, we have this kind of esoteric, really cool, a group of pioneers are pushing this, and it, you know, it's starting to get out to the hundreds of thousands of people around the world. But when is it going to break through to mainstream education? When is it going to break through to fire departments and police departments and universities? And should I say the medical system? Hello, folks, wake up out there. Oh, God, you know, you're so... Yeah, I mean, they're good for setting bones and stuff like that, but in so many ways, they're really being part of the problem right now. And of course, you know, treatment of addiction and addiction. And right now, the main pushers that are addicting our people are doctors, because they just haven't quite figured out what to do with these powerful opioids yet in a skillful way. So, come on, people. Yeah.
You know, it's all happening. That's the amazing thing.
Yeah.
I'm on a lot of mailing lists, different industry mailing lists that give you like the inside baseball on who's buying who and what products are being developed and who's rolling them out at what big hospital chains or whatever. And it's, man, it is happening out there in every direction at scales that are just unimaginable. And so we're really living at a very, very special time. But I think one of the things that we've really tried to keep in mind from a transformative technology standpoint, and that I try to keep in mind personally. So it's because we can go in all these different directions, right? So the transformative technology doesn't deal with things that are clinical, right? We just made a decision, like there's trillions of dollars being poured into clinical applications of all of this stuff, right? That's not an area that needs help. And so although you could say technology for well-being is good for people that are clinically depressed, if you have a clinical diagnosis, pretty much you're not in the trans tech space. So trans tech, we've basically had to rule out what it isn't from all of these different things, right? It's not smart home stuff unless it relates specifically to well-being in very certain ways, as an example, right? It's not genetic stuff unless it relates to well-being in very specific technological ways. It's not all of these different, it's not hospital stuff, it's not clinical stuff, it's not whatever. But all that stuff is going on there. And the reason we don't worry about those other things is because there's so much money in all of those other areas and so much other attention being paid to all of those other areas. And where there really isn't much attention being paid at all, and why we spend our time on the trans tech space, is because the sort of notion that average people could be phenomenally happier than they are, that this problem of the human condition that we've all inherited from this million-year-old genome or whatever, you know, around us, fear of scarcity, constant fear, worry that some tiger's going to rip our arm off. And it's not the tiger anymore, right? It's the boss sitting across the desk from us saying, you're fired and I'm going to ruin your career and whatever. And it's like, feels like a tiger's ripping our arm off. But a tiger isn't ripping our arm off, right? We can just go do something else. Or maybe that guy's just full of crap and we'll have a much better job in a day and a half. Or who knows what, right? But it's like these old structures in our nervous system are just kind of shanghaied by our modern environment for no reason. And they produce all of this fear and worry and angst and fundamental discontentment and scarcity, you know, and all of that. And that's just silly. And kind of, for most of us in the modern environment, it might not be silly if we're living in a third world somewhere. A lot of that could still be very valuable from a third world perspective. But certainly for most of us in the first world, that's just not a relevant way that we should have to experience life anymore. So we really in TransTech try to really focus on that bullseye of helping every day, helping all of us that are just average people out here, you know, have the tools that they need to shed that old programming, to shed all of that old nervous system wiring, and to get an upgrade to the nervous system that they should be living with in, you know, 2017 as we're making this video.
Yeah, and you know, we can be authentically happy, deep happiness, and from that,
why not?
a new world, right? Hey, Jeffrey, this has been fantastic, man. Really, really appreciate it. I can't wait. I'm going to see you in Palo Alto here in a couple, 2.5 weeks
No,
or
that's
so.
going
So
to be
that'll be
awesome.
fun. Yeah, having a lot of fun with Vite and company, and they're tremendous people. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you and you know, getting our little, you know, our community, so they come and they move around, and in this kind of this new environment, one person's in charge of this and that. We all move up, you know, and it's really elastic and evolutionary and beautiful. So, Javi, did you have anything else you'd like to add or say, or in
Yeah.
summation?
Well, I just, yeah, hearing you the last, 20 minutes or so, I came back to thinking how we started the chat as well. Like, how do you measure transformation? Because I guess that, for example, all the physiological measures that you can take now must be location dependent. Like doing heart math for someone that is in location A or 1 or whatever it is must be different to somebody else. So, I kept thinking, what is transformation for me? And at this time, for me, if somebody who doesn't have an experience of what transforming might be asked me, how do you notice that you're transforming? I would say, well, I seem to be able to not feed conflict as much as before, or I do it, if I do it, it's in a different way, or, I have an increased capacity for understanding what happens to me and what happens to others, and forgiving, others and myself, etc., etc. So how do you see transformation, around all that you've been sharing?
That's a great question. I am, so focused on transformation into persistent non-symbolic experience. I mean, that's just really what I'm into. Not that I don't support this whole other broad community of well-being and, just basically transforming into like what you're talking about, which can just be being happier, being more at peace, being less emotionally reactive. All of those things are wonderful. And in fact, let me just talk about something relating to that briefly. And that's that people will often hear me talk about finding your fit. When sometimes I often get interviewed around meditation and stuff like that. And I tell people, well, in our data, basically you have to find your fit. So you're looking for your the type of meditation that works for you right now. Maybe maybe that'll only work for you for an hour, or maybe it'll work for you for years, who knows? But, as long as it's working for you, keep using it. And when it stops working for you, then use something else. And what I'm kind of surprised almost nobody ever asks is, what does that mean? Right? Like, you're asking really sort of, what does that mean? I don't get that question very much, which is a little funny to me. But I can tell you there's a point in the Finder's course right about halfway where we kind of turn people loose for a couple of weeks, and we let them experiment on their own and start to get their feet under them in terms of figuring out what method, that we taught them in the first half of the course works the best for them. And they can mix and match and combine. It's a very flexible process. And sometimes people will ask me, like, how do I know? For a lot of people, it's just very obvious when they have a meditation method that it just, okay, I get that one worked for me, right? None of the other ones, they were all like grinding teeth or whatever. That one, I get it. That one worked for me. I'm just going to use that one. But occasionally people want some clarification around it. And so they write in and they're like, how do I know? And I think one of the most powerful answers to that, because they'll often list like all of these different things, right? Like in this one, I have this sense of spaciousness, and, in this one, I blank out, and in this one I just sit there and think all the time, and in this one blah blah blah, right? And I usually answer much simpler, I think much more simply than they think I'm going to. I basically say, which one of those had the largest impact for you when you weren't meditating? I almost don't care what happens to people during meditation, right? It's like, how did that affect the rest of the week? When, and so that I think is it goes to your point of transformation. For me, transformation is really about meaningful, productive changes in your life, and they can happen in small ways, or they can happen in really major sort of PNSE ways, or whatever else. I think they're all great, but they all have that in common, right? It's not that there's some sort of special feeling while you're sitting there or laying there or whatever, however you're or walking or however you're meditating. It's really the impact that it has when you're not.
Well, I think the term finder comes from Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus said, seek and ye shall find, right? The early part of the Sermon on the Mount. And to kind of sum it up, I go to Matthew 7:20, where it's the last part of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, "Wherefore by their fruits you shall know them." You know, is it good? Are you happier? Are you more resilient? And right, it's not just about having groovy, psychedelic, mystical experience while you're on the cushion or whatever device you're using. It's how does it help you? You know, what are the fruits? What are the benefits and the manifestations of increased resilience and happiness and skillfulness and peace and joy and compassion and connection with others and yourself and the world? You know, and that's really where, you know, the rubber meets the road, and that's how we can test these things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and not just, you know, obviously you want to do the objective scientific stuff too, obviously, but the other side is a phenomenological experience of being alive and how this stuff is impacting us in a good way.
And the two combine, you know, I mean, HeartMath is probably the most successful. HeartMath is probably the most successful company in the space. They're the granddaddy of the space in many ways. I mean, I'm sure they sell hundreds of thousands of units a year, which is a lot of devices to reduce your stress, which is essentially how they sell them. And, you know, I think we can make a very strong case that HeartMath has done a crap ton of scientific research on the way to all of their products and to all of their product releases, and have, you know, they've really driven forward the science on heart rate and heart rate variability and its impacts on consciousness for the positive and all of that. And so they're a great example of those two things coming together. Because it was the science that basically allowed them to, you know, they could have put out a GSR product, right? They could have put out a brainwave product. They could have put out a temperature product. They could have put out a lot of different products. And they looked at all those technologies, I know, in the early days, and they settled on heart rate. You know, they settled on an HRV product after doing research across all of those different types of devices. And so the research led them to the device that they felt that they could mass promote. And then the research led them successively to better algorithms and user experience and whatnot, such that they have an incredibly powerful and super effective product. Like, their algorithms are licensed by some of the smartphone manufacturers and stuff these days, because, you know, why reinvent the wheel? These guys have done 20, 30 years in this or whatever.
And there's a field of wisdom and experience that has developed around the product. So it's not just the product itself, but they really get it now. You know, they really understand what they're doing. And it's very clear when I was talking to Deborah that she gets it on a very deep level. And it was beautiful. It was enlightening and inspiring and very loving.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think I think they both the science and the research and all of that and the experience, you know, they have to come together. That's part of the trans tech space. In trans tech, we're big believers in research. We're big believers in science. We're big believers in evidence-based stuff. Even for things that look kind of woo-woo-y, right? Like, I know Don Estes has been on or will be on your show. And I think, you know, Don's stuff looks bizarre to people. Oftentimes, to me, it looks like something straight out of like some 1970s New Age movement sort of thing, right?
But when very powerful. I got to use this stuff actually at the conference, and it was the most psychedelic, non-psychedelic experience I think I'd ever had. Man, I was in a different dimension. Boom, you know, it was very strong. And Don's a lovely guy. I really like him a lot. We really connected on a heart level and you know, personal level at the conference. So
yeah, I mean, and there's advanced mathematics, like crazy advanced mathematics behind his stuff. There's like supercomputing power behind his stuff. I mean, there's like real decades of amazing research that's behind all of that, right? And so I think sometimes, even within the trans tech space, people will come and they'll look at a product and they'll kind of bounce off someone, right? Jim Hart is another one I noticed that sometimes people bounce off of. You know, I had somebody say that he looks like he's, you know, so Jim Hart is a pioneer of neurofeedback. He runs an outfit called BioCybernaut. They're probably the best alpha, they may be the best brainwave training place, period. Jim is just incredible. I have almost endless respect for Jim. I just saw him a couple of days ago, actually, in Sedona, where he has one of his centers. And fortunately for me, his travel was delayed, and I got to say hi to him. But when you look at him, I mean, people say that guy looks like he stepped out of like 1976 or something. You know, he wears like the yellow shirts and blue ties, and it's like a 1970s color scheme. And people, and I think it's sad that people have those kind of judgments, right? Because the reality is that the colors that, when you walk into his center, what he's wearing, his shirt, and what he wears when he's out in public speaking for the same reasons, his colors, everything, every single part of that environment is designed to shape your brainwaves. right? He wears the colors that he wears. He speaks the way he speaks. He presents things the way he presents things, all out of, he's been researching this stuff since longer than I've been alive. And he's poured, millions and millions and millions of dollars into this research. The classically trained scientist who was a professor at UCSF. The whole bit, right? And so people look at what he's created, which is in fact this incredible experience to help them shape their brainwaves, and out of their own ignorance, they want to paint their own cultural judgments around it and think, oh, that guy's just stuck in the past. No, he's not stuck in the past. When you're looking at that yellow shirt and blue tie, you're benefiting from, almost 50 years and close to probably $10 million, if not more than that, in research that this guy's done over the course of time. He's doing that for you, right? And so a lot of these guys that have been around for a long time and who have really figured out some stuff and have just chosen to present it based on effective, like Estes or like Jim Hart. I think they're lots of times unfairly criticized by people on this very surface level. And the reality is that their stuff is just so powerful.
Yeah, they were the pioneers of all this stuff, They're our elders and pioneers and are still totally leading the game in many ways. So
yeah, totally. And Jim happens to have, when I think of the scale of things that Jim is forgetting while we're on this call, that the rest of us will never get to learn, just because new stuff's coming in. So some stuff's got to be going out all the time, right? It's like a crime against humanity. People should just be there recording as every thought, all of the time. And it's just a great degree the same for people like Don and whatever else. So, and that's one of the things that we try to do in the last TransTech conference, is that there's such a gap between old and new. So I wanted to bring Siegfried Ottmer, for instance, and Judith Pendleton, and Jim couldn't make it, unfortunately. He had a conflict with speaking somewhere else. And just sort of these old school people together. We brought John Cowan in, another very old school neurofeedback guy. Very into happiness and all of that, and one of the first guys to create neurofeedback for happiness, really, and stuff like that. And because the kids, if I want to say kids, people like me, right? I like to think of myself still as a kid, but even younger people that are in their 30s and in their 20s that come to the TransTech conference, that are like Silicon Valleyites and whatever else, they just pay no attention to those vast troves of knowledge that are there. And I noticed that they just keep reinventing the wheel again and again and again and again, and not to nearly the level of depth that they could be if they would just listen to Jim Hart for a while, or listen to John Cowan for a while or whatever else. And so one of the things we wanted to do with the conference last time is really put a mashup of that. We basically got the best person that we could get on each of these different technologies to present on it. And then we had a panel of some of the old school folks and whatnot. And so people got to really, and all those videos are online, incidentally, at ttconf.org. The videos from all the conferences are online and available. And so you can see all of that. You can see, you can get that knowledge. And so we're just trying to blend that together to get those cultures.
Yeah. And, I'm very historically bent and love history. And one of the things I loved about this technology is we're not discrediting or cutting us off from the ancient wisdom traditions, really affirming everything they were doing. Said, God, you pioneered it. You showed us it was possible. Exactly. Now we need to make it so everybody can experience this more. And we feel connected to the ancestors and connected to these traditions not in a real vital way. And, if we can do that in 2 generations with TransTech, God help us, we need to really honor those who came before us, because I really think those of us who are kind of working on this cutting edge, we're really not only working for the generations to come, but we're also working with and for the generations that came before us. It's important.
Yeah, there are ceremonial fire pits, right, where they've done the math. And the ring of people dancing around the fire basically would, at a certain rate, would have flickered, which apparently they can tell from how they wore the rock patterns or whatever, not my thing, right? It would basically flicker
they were rocking
alpha brainwave pattern to people that were sitting watching them going around the fire, right?
Yeah.
Or the Tibetan tingsha bells, the little symbol looking things that are separated by a lanyard of leather. You cling them together. One of the things that another sort of great pioneer in the binaural beats space, Jeff Thompson, told me, which I hadn't heard before him, and I then went and tested it, and it turned out to be true, is that if you take real tingsha bells, these little cymbal things, and you clang them together, and then you hold one up to each ear, they basically have an alpha binaural beat effect. And so, these were incredible technological advancements in their day, right? I mean, now I feel like there's people that often want to judge the use of technology for things like this, right? But what they don't realize is that these meditation techniques, the dancing around the fire things, the tingsha bells, all of the sounds and the chanting and
drumming and sweat lodges
technologies,
and fasting and all the things they did, which I've done a lot of in my journey. Truly amazing stuff, you know.
Yeah, those guys were on the absolute bleeding edge of science and engineering in their time. What they came up with is just phenomenal. I mean, the alpha hertz thing between the tingsha bells and who the heck could have possibly come up with that, right? I mean, that's just incredible technology. And it seems like we fell into a gap for many, many years in the West where we were like, you know, not viewing that as technology, but viewing that as like what's right to use, or, you know, like we weren't supposed to be innovating on it for whatever reason.
Right.
You know, we were just supposed to use what these geniuses passed down to us. And now I think we're finally stepping out of that with the spiritual technologies type stuff.
Well, yeah, when hosting all these conversations, I really had to expand my vision of what technology is, you know, and was. I mean, it's vast. So, and just about everything is included. So terrific. Well, how inspiring. Thank you. I mean, we have to do this in part 1 and part 2. Okay.
Totally.
And you answered the question. Well, we talked to him last year. Do you think he has anything to say this year? Yeah. No,
I guess so.
No. This has been great. I mean, and everybody that we're double dipping with, it's been amazing because, you know, you're in a different place. Like, you know, Zinni say you can't step in the same river twice. Man, this river has been flowing and going in the last year. And anyway, super gratitude. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful to you.
A lot of inspiration and clarity, and, you know, your work on this field and scientific, but also with the intuitive. You know, the intuitive and scientific knowledge has to go together, or just both get out of balance. And you're really a wonderful manifestation of that. So thank you so much. And thank you again, Javi and Pam and Louie and the guys that helped us do all this stuff. So
yeah, thanks to all of you guys. I just want to say, actually, you guys maybe don't get this, but thank you, because, you know, I don't know if you realize you've really put together something really special with this series of podcasts. I know Pam has worked very hard to program it. You've worked very hard to program it. It's just, there's really nothing like it out there. It's kind of surprising that it wasn't done before this. But the way you've put it together, the people that you're inviting on, the conversations that you're having, I enjoy them. So my congratulations to you. You're just doing a great job.
All right. Thank you.